Good evening, everyone, and welcome to APF Heritage Week's 2025 third podcast called Canvas of a Nation. In this podcast, we will explore the history, evolution, and impact of visual arts in Pakistan and understand how art serves as a lens to examine cultural identity, heritage, and social change, both within the country and across the diaspora. Our special guest today is Niilofur Farrukh, who is a Karachi-based art historian, critic, author, curator, and activist. She regularly contributes on art and art-related topics to national and international journals. Ms. Farrukh co-founded ASNA, a nonprofit emerging from a need to address the rupture between craft and art in South Asia, and is also a founding editor of Nukta Art, president of the Pakistan section of Paris-based International Arts Critics Association, and is chair of Censorship and Freedom of Expression Committee. As a curator, she has national and international shows to her credit and has represented her country as the commissioner at the Asian Art Biennale, Dhaka, the Tashkent Biennale, and the Kathmandu International Art Festival. She has recently edited with Amin Gulji and John McCary, Pakistan's Radioactive Decade. Her book, Pioneering Perspectives, was published in 1996. Her most recent book is A Beautiful Despair, The Art and Life of Meher Afroz. She is one of the founders of the Karachi Biennale Trust and served as the CEO of the Karachi Biennale and led its first four editions from 2017 to 2024. Welcome, Niilofur.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much for being here. So, as you know, this series of podcasts is for APF Heritage Week, trying to understand the culture and heritage of Pakistan. And the first question I have is to gauge your understanding of heritage preservation in Pakistan. So, in your view, what is the relationship between heritage preservation and contemporary art in Pakistan?
I think there is a living relationship in the sense that contemporary art often talks about legacies, memories, and when it's installed in heritage buildings, it also brings them alive and their stories. So I think, like in the Karachi Biennale, we chose to use the built heritage as a way of, underlining the common legacy of the people. Like, I don't know if I told you, the Karachi Biennale came at a time when there was a lot of violence in Karachi. And the art professionals and art educators wanted to use art to bring people together, to build cultural bridges. So we felt what's common in the city for every citizen. And of course, that is the history of this place. So we used the heritage sites as, kind of improvised venues. And everybody came and celebrated them. And we also made sure that the history of that place was also highlighted. And conversations were held around that legacy. So I think this kind of a natural, organic kind of relationship with the built heritage, with legacies is always there. And, also in contemporary art, a lot of artists are using mediums, techniques that are very traditional, actually, in the sense they're just exploring that part of our heritage. Several years ago, we had this, kind of artwork that was really about technology. I mean, this is a kind of, they had done a robotic kind of installation of a Chitrali sitar. So, this kind of coming together of something which is this ancient musical instrument and its kind of robotic form, I thought was very interesting. So this continuous exploration of the heritage continues. And I think it also kind of gives the artist a great deal of this sense of their own culture.
Thank you so much for that lovely answer, Niilofur. And that really is a great segue into my next question, because you mentioned how the Biennale came at a specific time in Karachi's history. So How do you think the evolution of visual arts in Pakistan has reflected the country's political and social changes since 1947, since history and heritage go hand in hand?
Yeah. Actually, this is a very big question because it covers 80 years. You know, in the early decades, the artists really concentrated on modernism or modern art because they felt it, kind of, in a way, it spoke to them regarding the change that was taking place, the spirit of the times. And they felt that, they couldn't talk about those changes in the traditional language of art. So they adopted modern art and continue to work with it and find this new identity or kind of a meeting point between modern art and their own culture. So when you look at works of, let's say, Shakir Ali, he is influenced by, he's modernist, but he's also influenced by Ajanta and Ellora, the figurative works that were done there. And if you look at some of the works of Bashir Mirza, he's also looking at the Mughal miniature as a source of inspiration. So this kind of back and forth is a very interesting outcome of Pakistani modernism. And of course, there were a whole lot of other artists, and we have time constraints, so we can't really go into it. But then when we started with contemporary art, now contemporary art is extremely flexible, inclusive, and it constantly thrives on change. So the artists could, go deeper into their own cultural roots. Like they could borrow mediums, they could borrow techniques, they could work across the board to, sort of get their message across. It's like, recently we had a young artist who was looking at, how our charpais or, the rope cots are woven. And she was using it to talk about family memories and how families would get together in courtyards and kind of again reflect on the changes, the social changes. This kind of constant use of traditional forms continues in contemporary art. I think also in terms of the social and political change, artists have worked continuously to reflect that in their work. Like, when we had, of course, the 1980s and late 1970s dictatorship of Ziaul Haq, there was a lot of art that was, dissident art, art of resistance that reflected, the people's voice. So, that continues. And throughout the social upheaval, we've had artists doing commentary on that change. So, I think artists haven't stood away from the reality of the time. They're very deeply connected to it.
Thank you so much, Niilofur. And do you want to add on to that?
Sure, I think there are many examples because, Pakistan has undergone a lot of different changes. So when we look at the war on terrorism, for example, there were a lot of artists like Imran Qureshi who were bringing attention to the fact that how Pakistan had, sacrificed so many lives and how we as a society had been impacted that. Then, of course, there were artists who were talking about, that only one message was going through, that, Islam has this only one fundamentalist kind of, message. But that wasn't true. And there were artists like Imran Qureshi and Amin Rahman and so many others who were trying to counter that narrative of extremism. So you have Amin Rahman, who lives in Canada, and throughout he was exhibiting work to kind of, in a way, deconstruct the message that was going out in the media. And, those kind of quotes that were out there. And he was constantly telling them, well, these quotes are, out of context. I think artists have, like even Meher Afroz, we have Meher Afroz who's constantly worked in her own particular way to, kind of decolonize the narrative. She's extremely traditional in her way, in her approach. She always links her work to poetry, to, the reality on the ground, and of course to women issues. And even the women artists of Pakistan have had a big role to play in, bringing awareness to the issues, like gender rights, women emancipation, women rights, violence against women. All these have been dealt from time to time throughout by women artists. And of course, male artists as well, because it affects the society. I mean, I remember, I took this exhibition, in 2010. For 2 years, I sort of curated a traveling exhibition that went to five, cities and towns in Pakistan. It was after this horrific, brutal murder of 5 women in Nasirabad. And I felt that, what can we do? Can we continue this dialogue? So once this exhibition travels through Pakistan, we can not only invite communities to have that dialogue, but also to keep that whole issue alive so we can keep calling for justice. So for 2 years, we traveled, we showed in different parts, and, had conversations with local activists.
So, Niilofur, we've been talking about how art has been used as a medium, as a tool for social change in the past. It's played a very positive role in driving positive social change and changing the narrative of what we see in Pakistan as a whole. So, what trends or themes do you think are currently emerging amongst younger Pakistani artists these days?
Unfortunately, the themes have remained the same because we are still looking for, human rights. We are fighting for, women's rights. But I think a new addition has been in the environment, climate change. So that has been expanded. People are talking about that. I think decolonization has continuously been a theme right from the beginning because, with all the independence movement manifestos, it was integral to them because everyone talked about this kind of epistemic rupture that had taken place during the colonial period, and they want to reclaim their own knowledge base, their entire culture, the way they wanted to sort of, live basically and enjoy it as free citizens. So that continues, but in different ways, because it has been seen that, different governments have not really broken away completely from the colonial, let's say, legislature, the colonial ways of administrating the government, the country. So obviously there are, the people has spoken, continue, again and again against those, kind of, let us say, draconian laws. And so artists continue to do that. But I think the narrative has expanded. They're using different kind of new genres, new mediums to talk about it, like the new media, hybrid art has become very popular. So, digital means and, the new technology is used to express the same ideas, but but expanding on it further and maybe looking at it deeply and from different dimensions. The same thing is with, performative art has become very popular. People work with the body, performative works have, they're part of a lot of exhibitions now. And there's a sense of freedom when you use the body to express something. It's, it may be ephemeral, but yet it leaves a tremendous visual impact. So that's something that's become popular. And of course, you have sound art and video art and new media art. Everything is out there. And of course, painting and printmaking continue to be, the cornerstone. But with each generation, you see them pushing envelope further. Yeah.
For sure. And now that we've talked about the history and the more recent past, what do you see the future of contemporary art in Pakistan? What role do you think it's going to play a much bigger role in the future? Or which direction do you see it going based on your vast experience with different forms of art and the history and the important role you've played in the art history of Pakistan?
I see that you see, public art is a new form that is being embedded, and the conversation between the audience and the artist has increased. It's definitely will become a catalyst for change as the dialogue continues. Because we must remember that the institutions that were founded in the 60s and the 70s, due to political change and ideologies, they all became very, very dysfunctional. So public space wasn't available to people. But now, slowly, with public art and the effort of interventionists, we are reclaiming public parks, heritage sites, and even public university spaces, campuses. And we are working there. And this gives people a chance to talk about issues together, and art becomes a catalyst. So automatically, this kind of, let's say, conversations are going to, work both ways. The artists will, connect better with the people. Us who are activists feel that this is a tool to kind of further expand on. And of course, the audiences, get a chance to voice their concerns as well. So I think this three-way dialogue has become very important. And if it continues and expands, then definitely I think art will change. It'll come out of the galleries. Of course, there will be galleries, but it will not be the only platform. It will become more public, the platform. And the connections, because, people quite often view art as very elitist. And this is where, we've had, 4 iterations of the Karachi Biennale. And I think we have slowly, kind of dispelled this notion that art is elitist, because we always chose themes that were close to the people, very relevant for the people. The art that was installed in public places allowed them to participate, to be a part of it, to even, we always made sure there were enough attendants there to answer their questions. And, and some of the participatory art also, performance art and other works also allowed people to become a part of the work. So all this, I think, inspires particularly the youth. And remember, Pakistan is a very large youth population. It inspires the youth. It gives them a sense that, innovation, creative ideas are of value, and they connect with it. So I think art has played a role in that direction. Yes.
Thank you so much, Niilofur, for that wonderful and comprehensive answer. And I want to build up on something you mentioned, how the general narrative about the general perception of art in Pakistan is that it's elitist and the public doesn't really engage with it much. So, how do you think the education system in Pakistan can better integrate arts and cultural history into its curriculum or in other ways? And what do you think are the main barriers for the public for better participation and engagement with arts?
Actually, these are two different questions in my mind. One of them has to do with academia. Has the academia, art academia, or otherwise kept up with the times? And unfortunately, it hasn't. It has responded to all, let us say, certain professional kind of trainings. But while literature and art is concerned, particularly art, because I can speak more confidently about that, art history today is not taught. The art history of Pakistan, is really not taught as a serious subject. We don't have archives. National College of the Arts is the only one that has begun to build its archive and catalog some of its earlier work, because as you know, it's over 100 years old. But still art history is taught in a very patchy way. Uh, if you don't teach art history, you don't archive, and you do not catalog all the memories, the lives of the artists, the last 80 years at least, the students come, understanding is that there is a vacuum in the country. Well, in reality, there is no vacuum. We have a very robust kind of art scene. It may be small compared to some other countries, but it is robust. It's very responsive to the social and political change of the country. So this information, this knowledge hasn't been transferred into the curriculum. The integration hasn't taken place. There's a great disconnect. And because of that, I think the art education suffers. Like I'm constantly talking to young people. They come to me when they're writing their thesis, their, dissertations. And quite often there are big gaps in their knowledge, which at the graduate and undergrad level, it shouldn't be so. So, we need to definitely make an effort to connect that. And also, history in our country is a contentious subject. There's so many different ways of looking at history. And it also really depends on the historian and the national narrative, how it's going to be interpreted. But in my opinion, we need to have many, many books. Everyone who can write should write, and whatever they can, because eventually what happens when a student or a researcher reads everything, they form their own opinion. It has to be layered and nuanced history. Because, that's why this book of ours, which is, Pakistan's radioactive decade, really talks about the 1970s, which was a very contentious period. Everyone has a different memory of it. And, it was a combination of a very large exhibition of intergenerational artists who were from that period, and young artists. And obviously, when in the 1970s, a lot of us did not have that information that is now available on the 1970s, which is the separation of East Pakistan, Bhutto's, kind of period, and then Ziaul Haq's period. We do not have complete information. I mean, we didn't have it, because of the censorship, the widespread censorship. But now that we have that information, our way of viewing that period has changed. And that is what this exhibition did. It was very inclusive. It brought everyone together. There were many voices. There were over 100 artists in that exhibition. And then we decided to put together this book, which reflected not only the artwork, but also we interviewed and, we commissioned 40 writers to write short essays, interview people of that time, personalities, because there was also a bright side to this period, which was the renaissance of the arts, of creativity. Many fields prospered under, the early period of Bhutto's times. And then, of course, we all know what happened after Zia's time, the censorship, the ideological change. So this book catalogs everything, and I strongly recommend people to read it. If you can access it through libraries, it is available. It's been printed by the Oxford University Press, because it doesn't give you one side of history. History never has one dimension alone. There are many things, and then you and your belief, with your own way of looking at things, your own perspective, you select, and then you understand how rich history can be. Because it's, many people live through a period, and they, of course, talk about it in their own memories and through the memories of writers and documenters. So I think our curriculum should reflect that. And unfortunately, our liberal art programs do not reflect the change, the socio-political change, unfortunately. There's so much literature, regional literature that's being written. There is a lot of material out there. And if that becomes a part of the curriculum, I think you will definitely see change, a more vibrant kind of outcome.
Those are all very great points, Niilofur, and I think the the main platform or way of bringing social change amongst the masses is always through education, and it would only be a hope and a dream for the artists and interventionists and even the Pakistani people to see more of that in our curriculums moving forward. Now, in one of your previous in our conversation, you mentioned how art is a catalyst, and I would like to use that to further ask you, how can art help bridge divisions within Pakistan, whether they're ethnic or class-based?
I think art doesn't have per se an identity. It has a message, a concept. And I think quite often now, particularly, I see those concepts are about collective experience. If we have, let's say, violence in cities, everybody goes through it. The art reflects that. If we have an ideological change, obviously, the way it kind of comes and is played out in the society, everybody sees that taking place. And quite often, artists, writers, comment on that. So people are bound by that collective impact of change. And artists, by highlighting it and talking about it, making it a catalyst for conversations, because I think you just said that education is an important tool to let's say build a society that's better informed, that's healthier, has a space for everybody, a tolerant society, I would say. I think art also opens up that space, because there are multiple ways of reading an artwork, just like there are multiple ways of reading good literature. I mean, good literature survives for centuries, and so does good art for that matter. So I think art does that. It opens up the space. And it also tells you about creativity. This is a century when creativity and innovation is being valued extensively. And so if our youth, who maybe are having an education which is very stereotypical, view art, and they see how artists are looking at a particular issue, they may also have a view on it. And quite often we have young audiences that come and tell us, well, we would like to do it this way, or we can add to it. So I think those kind of responses are very enriching for the artists and for all of us who organize these biennales, because that means the engagement is taking place. And that's what public art is about: engagement, getting, putting new knowledge across. When we show on climate change or ecology, we also talk about the rampant urbanization, which impacts everybody. Karachi has had these tremendous heat waves for the last almost 6 years. And when we had the exhibition on ecology, one of our themes was ecology. We were looking at how there was a whole species of low-flying birds in Karachi that had been, lost. Because of the high-rise buildings, there was no place for them to nest, number one. Secondly, the heat, the concrete environment had taken the temperature of the city, higher. And obviously that meant less vegetation, more, kind of atmospheric heat. So, these species had just either migrated out of the cities or dwindled completely. And we made that the core of our investigation of the Biennale. It was just a sort of a metaphor we used, that, those birds and development and the loss of the species. And then we asked artists from all of the world to talk about their narratives, the ones that hadn't been kind of publicized, not the generic ones, but their stories and how they've experienced the climate change and ecological change. So I think these hidden stories always touch the heart of people. And they tell them that their stories are important. And I think that's what art does, really.
Thank you, Niilofur. That's a very nice perspective, and it actually changes the perspective of how, instead of being segregated and segmented, we collectively as Pakistanis experience the same issues, the same tragedies and catastrophes, and art itself never has an identity. It has a message, and I think that is a wonderful perspective. Now, we've talked about the history of art, how it's driven social change, what can artists and the government and the public do better in engaging with art more. I would love to know your perspective on how the Pakistani American diaspora in the US, what role can they play in bridging that divide and playing their part in making art a tool for positive change in Pakistan, because we all have to play our roles in some way. So, as Pakistani Americans, what can that diaspora do better?
I think better connection with our artists and our art scene always will, open doors for both groups of people. I'm in touch with a lot of artists, Pakistani artists or artists of Pakistani origin that live in the US, right from Shazia Sikandar to lesser known artists, emerging artists. And I always follow Shazia's work, and I feel in some ways is deeply connected to her homeland. You know, she now has been living there for a good many years, but even then, the memory of the homeland, the cultural connection always is there, not in an obvious way, but is subtly woven into the narrative. I think a lot of Pakistani artists there, they are getting more platforms to exhibit their work. But I think maybe a concerted effort would help. Like, okay, let's talk about what we would like to have in Pakistan, and maybe the diaspora can in some way support that. In Karachi and other cities, what we would have always liked, and we have repeatedly told the government, is workshops for artists. Workshops is a space, an art space, where you can have certain facilities and studio spaces, and artists can go there and work. Because we had a very kind of a thriving ceramic scene in Pakistan, but it died out because there were no workshops that artists could go and work. Well, in many countries, they have these public spaces that are rented at nominal rates, and people go and work there. And then everybody does not have studio space. So some artists who would like to do bigger works can go into these studio spaces and work. So, that's a facilitation that would help. And, I've spoken to many people about it, that if we can have it, it would help. Then I think acknowledgement of these people, the diaspora has a good idea as to, in their cities and in the United States, what are the large forums, platforms, and maybe projecting Pakistani artists in those forums. Because we have this immense talent. I mean, I've seen art from all over the world. I visited so many biennales and countries. And I think the Pakistani art is tremendous. It has a lot to say, and I think the talent is no less than any other place. So quite often, the only thing lacking is opportunity. That if they are, showcased in these important forums, they will, get an opportunity, show their work, move ahead. And of course, people who are collecting, people, support the local art scene. Like if there are books published on art, kind of pass them around. Make sure your library has these books, because I visited several universities in England and in Europe, as well as in Canada and the US. And I found those books on Pakistan, whatever the books are, dozens of books have been printed, but they're not in those libraries. The South Asian departments should have these books in their libraries. So all this will, whatever knowledge that has been produced in the country will get transferred. People will not only depend on the media reports, because obviously media reports are highly politicized. So you will get another kind of way of looking at Pakistan through these books. And whenever you have a chance, call authors, call artists, talk about them. Now you can do these kind of webinars with them. The more we sort of project the contemporary art scene, the contemporary literary scene, I think it will begin to make a difference. I mean, first, of course, the diaspora itself, which may not be that deeply connected with Pakistan, can begin to acquire this knowledge, this new information that we have out here, the new books, knowledge, and then obviously disseminate it where they feel, it would make a difference. Because I think we all want to take pride in, our origin. And it's wonderful to have a wider kind of outreach. I think you're mute, Maha, for some reason. Yeah.
I was just saying, I completely agree with everything you said, and that's the purpose of having you here and having a Heritage Week for American Pakistanis. Just like you mentioned, the the views that you get from the media might be biased, might be skewed towards, a certain mindset, and I think the diaspora and everyone is just tired of hearing negative things about the country where most of us belong from. So the purpose of doing these podcasts and having these conversations is to tell our story ourselves and putting Pakistanis, whether it's artists, whether it's musicians, whether it's anybody, in a positive spotlight so they can share their narrative and change the overall narrative in the diaspora as well. So you completely hit on the points that that drives the purpose of what we're trying to do at APF and what we're trying to do at Heritage Week as well. So we've heard a lot from you about the deeper issues in Pakistan and how art can be used as a catalyst and as a tool, and all of the amazing things that you mentioned about art history in Pakistan. But just to close off, I would love to learn more about you personally. What inspired you, Niilofur, to pursue art criticism and curation in Pakistan, and how has your journey evolved over time as an interventionist?
I think two main reasons were behind it. One is that I had the most wonderful, inspiring teachers. Some of the masters of this country, like Ali Imam, Bashir Mirza, Ahmed Parvez, Sadiqain. And I think they were these tremendously, not only giants of their time, but also inspirational figures, mentors. And I could see the selflessness with which they worked. They was kind of passionate about art, they was passionate about giving Pakistan whatever they could. And I think that inspired me a great deal, because I think each time I do an intervention, I think about them. And of course, my own interest lay in art, history, and in ideas, theories. So I think it was a natural coming together. And, my father was a great history buff. And, in our house, we had all these history books, and we would read them and we would discuss them. We would discuss movements and ideas. I think all that obviously has a role to play in, how how you mature and perceive the world. And when I joined the art school and sort of started looking at art, I always felt I would like to talk about the context. I would like to talk about the art rather than making it. I think that was something that was always with me. So I began to write for friends. Then I was invited to write for newspapers and magazines and, present papers. My research extended. And I think there was one thing I felt that there was a disconnect between art that was being created. The artists were looking more towards either, they were looking at maybe the collectors. They were not connecting with the people, in terms of an audience, the general people. I think Sadiq Khan was primarily the only one who would open his exhibitions to everyone at the Arts Council. And he would welcome them. The man on the street would feel equally confident walking into a Sadiq Khan show. It wasn't kind of intimidating. And he himself was the kind of person who would meet everyone. I have a great memory of those shows. And I felt that disconnect needs to be addressed. So gradually in my work, I began to look at the audience because although a lot of artists are talking about the issues of the people, the wider issues of the country, but they're not showing in forums where those people can connect with the work. So, in order to understand it better, I joined the Women Action Forum because obviously women concerns were always there for all of us because our country has really, women issues are very much part of our daily lives. And I joined the Women Action Forum, and I also worked a lot with these activists, understanding how they work with society, different segments of society. For me, that was a tremendous learning curve, actually, because in the art world, you cannot get this experience. It's very isolated in many ways. So I think I brought back that experience to my curatorial work, my writing. I mean, whatever I had been writing previously in the 90s was also very much about this thing that was bothering me. But when I came back, I didn't really leave the Women Action Forum, but I could not manage multiple things. So obviously the activities there became less, or the engagement there became less. Then I curated the No Honor in Killing show, which I told you about, toward Pakistan cities for 2 years. And that activism and interventionist work became more serious and more focused. Then, of course, I had been writing for a lot of publications, and we thought we should have our own art journal in Pakistan, which was Nukta Art. And prior to that, we also founded Asna. Now, Asna was a way of working with the community, using a lot of the community techniques and highlighting them. So we worked with these kumhars from all over Pakistan, and we tried to build a bridge with the contemporary ceramic scene. We had four international Asna clay triennales, which, we had ceramists from all over the world coming and attending. So we had the Nukta journey then. Nukta was a space where we would talk about issues, thinkers, art thinkers would come together, art critics would come together, and it was a kind of a discursive platform. And we would talk about ideas, and we would, give space to, to larger essays, to research-based work. And I think we had several interesting interventions, editorial interventions. One of them was, I think Pakistan was celebrating its 70 years, and we invited all the countries that had been also liberated around 1947. And we asked people there to write on the art scene. One of the countries was Indonesia. And I thought that was very interesting because, how had they developed? What were the issues that they were facing? So, that was, I felt, a historical kind of intervention of art history. And then, of course, we had, we hosted seminars on decolonization. it wasn't called decolonization. We called it the anxious century, because this took place in the first decade of the century. And we talked about how we saw this century unfolding. And we were more optimistic than the times we live in, by the way. So, and then of course, from the Nukta could not be sustained because of Pakistan was going through a lot of economic upheaval. Printing became very expensive, so we had to wrap it up. We could not make it a digital magazine for some reason, for different reasons, actually. But at the moment, people who are interested in reading about Nukta, the archives of Nukta are being printed in the Karachi Collective, which is an online journal. Anyone can access their website. It's an open kind of forum. And some of the archives of Nukta are being, put up on that. So that's a way of. So I've been writing a lot of columns, and I also write a column for the Karachi Collective in case somebody wants to read my writings. Then the Karachi Biennale at a time when Karachi was in crisis, as I told you, and we felt very, very helpless because the violence was escalating, the people were polarized. It was a kind of an ethnic divide, a religious divide, sectarian divide. It was horrible. And Karachi has a history of being very multicultural and very diverse, and has been a home, and it sort of embraces everyone who comes here for economic reasons or whatever reasons. So we felt that some of that spirit needed to come back. And we started the Biennale, to kind of address some of those issues. And public art obviously had been an interest. And I became a part of it. And then I got this very interesting chance, and I must talk about it because a lot of people don't know much about public art. Public art is now really getting a lot of traction all over the world because they feel this is a way to bring the community together. Also, in a way, do certain development work. When I say development has become a very different kind of word, but let us say something that energizes the community. Development always sort of comes to your mind, the brick and mortar aspect of it. No, to bring the community together. And I'm a part of this, public art, International Public Art Prize that is run by an organization, which is the Public Art Prize Organization and the University of Shanghai. And, you get to learn about public art on all the continents. And it's become a very dynamic movement. So I just wanted to share it with you because there's a lot happening in art that will take us in a different direction.
Thank you so very much, Niilofur. I think there's no amount of recognition that would be sufficient for the amount of work and commitment you've dedicated to art history and contemporary art in Pakistan. And you are definitely a role model for those who want to pursue careers or are passionate about art in Pakistan. And thank you all for joining us today for this rich and thought-provoking conversation on Canvas of a Nation. Through Niilofur Farrukh's insights, we've traced the contours of Pakistan's visual arts and how they reflect on the nation's history, the challenges prevailing the different narratives, and also serve as a powerful tool of identity, resistance, and imagination. As we celebrate APF Heritage Week 2025, we hope that this dialogue inspires deeper engagement with arts, not just as a creative expression, but as Niilofur mentioned, a vital thread in the tapestry of our shared heritage. Until next time, thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much, Niilofur.
You're welcome, and thanks again. Bye.